Hello and welcome to episode 279 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and I am joined by the host of last week's episode of Retro Encounter, Eva Padilla.
Hey y'all, what up?
I had a slightly difficult first half of March, listeners. I don't want to get too personal on the podcast, but I had some life obstacles. And so we had to shuffle around the schedule a little bit, and Eva recorded an excellent Pokemon episode last week that I'm very grateful for, so thank you again. But we are back on track now and ready to talk about the next game on our schedule, Muramasa, the Demon Blade, which is a game by Vanillaware Games, released on the Wii in the late 2000s, and then with a Vita remake in the early 2010s. So Eva, I think we're both pretty early on in this game. What are your early impressions of Muramasa so far?
Gorgeous. I mean, it's that's the first thing that kind of stands out to you is the aesthetics. I first played this game like shortly after it came out. I strangely enough got this and Okami in the same GameStop visit.
On the Wii and not the Vita?
Yeah, on the Wii. So I got
cool. Okay.
So I got both of those because I was just like, I want some very artistically rich, aesthetically pleasing games. But I was also like a teenager, so I didn't get it. I didn't understand them very well.
Also, two very Japanese art style games.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just getting into anime around that time too, so that kind of makes sense. So I only played it for a little bit back then, both those games, but I was still struck by the arts. And now playing it on Vita, especially with that OLED screen, it looks gorgeous. It's a very beautiful game. It's very steeped in Japanese mythology, and I'm pretty fascinated by it. It's my first Vanillaware, really first Vanillaware experience, so yeah.
I am 100% with you on the art and aesthetics of this game. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. I think the backgrounds are beautiful, the animations are beautiful, a lot of the character work is... it looks great and is at least interesting. But you mentioned this is your first Vanillaware game. This is not my first Vanillaware game, but I think we should talk about Vanillaware in general. And let's just kick it off right now. Vanillaware is the game studio of George Kamatami, who is a artist that has been around the games industry since the PS1 and Saturn era. He had a couple projects that sort of didn't pan out and ended up making his own studio that I believe began with Odin Sphere on the PS2 and has since released several games in succession. These are not all of them probably, but from memory, it's we have Odin Sphere, Grim Grimoire, Muramasa, Dragon's Crown, and most recently 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim. Did I miss any big hitters in there?
I don't think any big hitters. I think there are a couple of smaller games, but those are like the big projects, really.
Right. Well, of those five, I've tried all of them. Like since Odin Sphere, I would see Vanillaware games in magazines or in online games publications. Me being more than a little bit of a fan of Japanese games, like really struck by their art style and intrigued by them, and I don't think I bought all of them, but I definitely tried all of them. I have Odin Sphere on PS2, and one of my friends got into Dragon's Crown, and we played a lot of co-op Dragon's Crown for several months in the early 2010s. But I really couldn't get into any of them. Like I was always sold by the art style, and then let down by the gameplay sometimes. Like Odin Sphere has sort of 5 chapters with a different playable character in each chapter, and I petered out on that game in chapter 2, and I don't think I even the first time I tried Muramasa, which was on the Vita, I didn't play it on the Wii. Like I just sort of decided the action was subpar and I didn't need to continue. So I've owned this game for several years, but I'm finally committing to finish it to now in 2021. But the thing that really sold me on Vanillaware was playing 13 Sentinels last year. I played it maybe a month or two after it came out and thought it was just excellent. And finally there was a game with story and mostly gameplay that was at least acceptable enough for me to drink in all of that gorgeous Vanillaware art for a few dozen hours. And Eva, I'm not sure if you've tried it or not, but 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim comes highly recommended when you have the time and the inclination to do so.
Yes, and I definitely do have the inclination, and I will find the time to do so. And that's something that I've kind of heard from a lot of people as well. I really couldn't get that much into Vanillaware. And then with Aegis Rim, a lot of people were like, yeah, actually the story holds up pretty well, and it grabs me more in a narrative sense than any of their other previous games have. So it just kind of clicks a bit better, and it's a better overall experience than the other ones.
Yeah, and I think that now I could be maybe underrating some of their previous games, but I think that like part of Vanillaware's story is that they haven't been that financially successful. Like you always hear about them selling below expectations, or sort of not, or like game development being a struggle for them at times. But the success of 13 Sentinels, I think, has been beyond their expectations, and that's good, because maybe we'll get more games that are as interesting and beautiful as 13 Sentinels, or at least as beautiful as Vanillaware games in general. And Princess Crown, that was the George Kamitami game for Saturn that he made. That was that sort of got him his big start. I was trying to remember it, but was struggling 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, and I know that when he made that, he he kind of believed in the vision. If you look at Princess Crown, and then even you look at 13 Sentinels, you can, and as you look at the games in their history, you can kind of see these linkages in that consistent art style that has persisted, and it seems like Kamitani was kind of upset with these bigger game development studios, or he just didn't work with them well, because I think he worked with Capcom and Atlas at some points before he worked on before he started Vanillaware in the early 2000s. And then Atlas became like a publishing partner with Vanillaware later, but I think there were some tensions, there were some butting heads earlier on.
Yeah, I think that at least without a lot of hard evidence, I think that Kamitami is a bit of an auteur. Like, he really has an artistic vision for each of the games he makes, but the struggles of, or I should say, the realities of game development makes a lot of his projects struggles that have occasionally not panned out. But 13 Sentinels is, I think, probably Vanillaware's most successful game, and gives the studio a brighter future than maybe they did for a while. Because 13 Sentinels was a little bit of an E3 joke at RPG Fan, because the Atlas booth would always have like a poster for 13 Sentinels, or like the same trailer from 2 years ago, even though they had advertised 13 Sentinels on the lanyards handed out to media.
Yeah, and that was a number of years ago, right? When they did that?
Yeah, I think that was 2017 or 2018. I remember in the moment and in following years, like, 13 Sentinels, are we sure that game's ever going to come out? But when it finally did, it made a really big splash, and ended up being one of my favorite games of 2020. And again, renewed my interest in Vanillaware, and made me more interested than ever to try another one of their games in 2021. So let's actually talk about the game we're supposed to be discussing, Muramasa the Demon Blade, whose Vita version is called Muramasa Rebirth. Now, it's a solo action game with a lot of RPG elements. It's 2D action with really beautiful backgrounds and nice animations, and a number of ways to start combos. You have your basic jump in your basic slash and combo, but there's ways to do air dashes and overheads and slide moves that gives you a pretty robust suite of moves. And then the circle button on the Vita allows you to use your blade's special attack, which is governed by a meter that can fill up. And if you have too many unsuccessful guards at once or use the special attack too much, your sword can break, which means you have to switch swords while your broken sword recovers. And your sword is recovering from being broken because all of your swords are these living demon swords that thirst for blood and are semi-sentient, but also can do things like naturally heal themselves and use demon powers. So, and also in addition to some basic RPG elements like gaining levels and using and cooking food to heal yourself, you can forge new swords and keep a loadout of 3 swords at once that you switch between in battle. So collecting swords, finding new swords, fighting enemies, gaining resources, using sword special moves, that's kind of the vibe of how you progress in this game.
Yeah, it's quite linear, at least early on, and I don't suspect it will break from that linearity too much. Not necessarily a dig at the game, just a state of affairs, but it's it definitely, it has a mini map in it even that just kind of points you left or right to where to go. So
yeah, it's rarely more complicated than this zone has 2 exits in the upper left and lower left. And there's some Metrovania elements where, there's maybe hidden areas or special trial caves that I think reward you with a rare blade if you finish them. Mm-hmm. There's something like 100 blades total, and that you can collect. So the completionists will have at least some activities to do in this game. And the story is linear and the events are linear, but we should mention there is a lot of backtracking through the same areas to get to new story points, and there are 2 playable characters. There's 2 parallel storylines, one with the main character Momohime and one with the main character Kisuke. That they begin on, I think, opposite sides of the map. Momohime sort of starts on the in the east, and Kisuke starts in the west. And I think they'll eventually probably visit some of the same areas, but at least in the early chapters for both characters, they're basically still sticking to their halves of the map for now.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, have Kisuke and Momohime briefly met in your game yet?
No, I don't think so.
So if you go to the hot springs, it was like the 3rd time I went to the hot springs, because I'm just playing the Kisuke route right now. You go there, and usually it's just some macaques or something that are there. Mm-hmm. But the 3rd time I went to a hot spring, Momohime was actually there.
I think I've only been to hot springs twice, so maybe I just need to wait for that 3rd meeting.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's specifically for the 3rd meeting or if it's just that that she might randomly, proc or something like that, where it's like, oh, I guess Momohime shows up here. But Kisuke sees her and he's like, oh, I'm sorry. I just didn't want to waste this bath. I hope I'm not making you uncomfortable. And then he skedaddles.
But are you sure it's really Momohime?
I don't know. I mean,
well, okay, let's go into the basics of each of their stories. Momohime is possessed by a demon sword, and this is not a big spoiler. This is at the very beginning of the game. A warrior, a sort of some kind of demon warrior named Jinkuro, was trying to kill a samurai lord named Yukinojo, and Momohime, who I don't think she's I think Momohime is Yukinojo's fiancé, and she tries to step in between the blow, but the technique Jinkuro was using was a soul-stealing technique, because so Jinkuro's goal was to have his soul replace Yukinojo's soul, and then do some kind of dark deed in Yukinojo's body, but instead he accidentally possesses Momohime, and so at the beginning of their story, you're not really Momohime, you are Jinkuro Momohime. And at first you have to find Momohime's missing soul, because if her soul gets destroyed, then her body will be destroyed as well. So Jinkuro's goal is, all right, first I gotta find Momohime's soul and secure it. So we'll be 2 souls in the same body, or maybe her soul sealed away just so her body won't be destroyed. But then I gotta find Yukinojo and properly possess him and give Momohime her body back. That's the gist of Momohime's story. And at first, a very confused Jinkuro is trying to track down Momohime's missing soul, then he finds her, then he's trying to track down Yukinojo in Chapter 3, where I stopped playing. And Kisuke's story is a little different. He's a ninja that I think is part of the clan that Yukinojo, the samurai lord that Jinkuro is trying to track down, is part of. And he wakes up amnesiac with a demon sword at his side, fights off a bunch of ninjas that are part of his clan, and he's just trying to figure out what happened to him. And when he finally reconnects with some of his ninja buddies and even meets Yukinojo, they inform him that he betrayed his ninja brethren, killed a bunch of them. The skulls at his waist are maybe souvenirs of the people he's killed, which is a little creepy. I didn't even notice he had a bunch of skulls on his belt until that conversation.
Right? Yeah, same here. I was like, he has. Oh gosh.
Oh, those are skulls. Oh, those are maybe the skulls of his friends. Yikes. And then Yukinojo sends him on a mission to track down a woman named Torahime. And I know that Torahime and Momohime are sisters, but I haven't met Torahime yet, because when I stopped in Kisuke's storyline, was traveling to find Torahime, and because she's like 3 provinces away, which is probably a dozen or more screens away, I decided, I'm gonna save and pick this up later. But you're a little bit. But you said you're only in Kisuke's story. You haven't started Momohime's yet. But you're a bit farther than I am. Like, how does it progress from there?
Well, so he ends up finding Torahime, and Torahime also is riding a giant flaming dead horse, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff.
That sounds pretty dope. Yeah.
And she is going to a castle to track down someone. And basically, Kisuke is going to be following her to that. He had fought her in battle, and now he didn't harm her either. He killed the demon horse that she was riding, but he left her completely unscathed. And she's off to this warlord. So we still don't really have a whole lot of clarity as to why Kisuke doesn't remember things and what exactly he's tracking down. But we do have, Muramasa that is forging blades for him and is kind of keeping him on his path in some way. And this is based on the famous, this famous smith, Sengo Muramasa. So he's building all these blades for you. And there are 108 for the 108 sins in Buddhism, I believe.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, it's the 108 earthly desires in Buddhism. Desires. Which and in Buddhism you strive to like remove yourself of earthly desires to achieve nirvana. So there's 108 is an important number in a lot of in a lot of sort of Japanese cultural things. That's why in One Piece one of Zoro's special moves is 108-pound cannon.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also why it's 108 stars of destiny in Suikoden. But I haven't seen the paths intertwine yet, but I believe they will do so in a more meaningful way in the second half of the story, because Muramasa is also in Momohime's story, but basically I think in both paths, each of them has a Kitsune sidekick. It's a tall one named Yuzaruha for Kisuke, and a more a more flirty one named Kongiku for Momohime, and Kongiku I hope I'm not mispronouncing her name. Kongiku is in love with Jinkuro, the demon that's possessing Momohime. So she's always professing her love to him while he's being a little bit rude to her, to be honest. and I think at the end of chapter 1 in both stories, your Kitsune ally gives you a mask or an item that allows you to connect with the spirit of Muramasa and forge swords together. And even your sword forging system is basically kind of a skill tree that lets you make new weapons. And they even share the same skill tree. There's at least one sword I've found already that has a prerequisite sword, one for Kisuke and one for Momohime. So these storylines and skills will intersect eventually, but other than the swords what swords they can use, I think the gameplay is identical for both characters. And using different swords only, again, because the moves are basically the same, other than, they'll play identically except for, whatever special sword powers are attached to the circle button.
Yeah, they basically have different run animations, and that's kind of it.
Oh no! More important, they have different sheathing animations, because the Kisuke throw your sheath up and have it land on the sword perfectly is really, really stylish. I like that a lot.
It is. Yeah, you're right. I am reducing it. Those animations for the sheathings are pretty rad.
Momohime's is a little bit tamer. She spins around in one hand and then casually sheathes it, but the stylish toss and catch that Kisuke does kind of reminds me of a classic Haomaru animation in Samurai Showdown. And Capcom vs SNK 2 Mark of the Millennium, very importantly. I don't know why they let a samurai fight in a Street Fighter game, but there you go. These animations are so good. Even the regular Mook ninjas that you deal with are like they at least move and jump in interesting ways, even though they're almost laughably easy to kill at one point, because you can deflect any attack by striking or blocking. You can dash around. I mean, there's 2 difficulty modes. And on Legend difficulty, their enemies are almost more targets than proper enemies. But on the other one, the one time I tried it, I was losing a little bit too much health and was concerned about my ability to beat this game in a prompt manner. So I think I'm going to stick with Legend for the rest of the way.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that the difficulty options aren't as simple like easy or hard. It's Legend and Chaos, which are not that's not a steady ramp up. Like that doesn't make a whole lot of sense in my brain. But I mean, because there's only 2, it's easy to make heads and tails about it. But if they were to make more intermediate difficulty options, that system would have just been like the Xbox going forward, where it's just like, which one is the one that came before? Was it the 360, the One, the X? I can't tell.
Yeah, it may be not quite as linear as the PlayStation's progressive consoles.
Yeah.
If the next one after the PS5 is something other than the PS6, I mean, the internet will have a lot of jokes ready from years of interpreting the Xbox order of things. Sure. And speaking of the difficulty, every time you play the game, you choose the difficulty that you go on. And so I think the second time I fired up my Vita to play this, which was several days ago by now, I was worried that I had accidentally deleted my save file or something. It's like, wait a second, what do you mean I have to click begin and then choose a difficulty setting? Did I not save last time? Mm-hmm. Like I was briefly confused, but no, it's just they make you pick the difficulty every time you load.
Mm-hmm. Which isn't too bad, because maybe there's a day where you're feeling a bit more ready for that challenge of the chaos. So. Oh
yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. I was just a little bit alarmed, unnecessarily.
Oh, sure.
Again, the second time I fired up the game. I haven't had any real technical difficulties with the Vita version. There's not even significant loading times. It runs pretty smooth. Yeah. But I think it did come out something like 3 or 4 years after the Wii version, which is a whole new development cycle. It's sort of remarkable that they had a slightly late port that runs this well, even.
Yeah. I think it's a pretty good showcase for what exactly the Vita could do and what a game on Vita could look like. Because, frankly, for me, a lot of time the Vita has been a retro machine for me. That's been my go-to portable PS1. It's been my upgraded PSP. So the only Vita game I had really played on there was Persona 4 Golden, which, was also a PS2 title originally. And this is a game that actually shows off how gorgeous the Vita could be. Just with that beautiful OLED. It's not as high of a resolution as a Switch screen, but it still looks just gorgeous.
I'm trying to think of the games I've enjoyed on my Vita the most, and they're overwhelmingly ports.
Right.
Even ones that had ports later. Like I played a ton of podcast games on the Vita, from Breath of Fire 4 to Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel, to this. I also enjoyed Persona 4 Golden very much on the Vita. The Vita had a little bit of an unfortunate reputation. Like, Sony sort of stopped putting a lot of money into it only a few years in. Its lifetime global sales are around the 16-17 million range, which is around the same as about as much as a Wii U. So and both of those consoles are considered unsuccessful for their publishers, but it's such a nice machine. Like, playing things on the Vita feels good. And again, I've played many a PS1, PSP port on it, including one of the ones I didn't mention was Tactics Ogre Let Us Cling Together last year for the podcast.
Me too.
And when we podcasted together on Vagrant Story, I was playing it on the Vita.
Same here.
The one tricky thing, though, is if you're playing a PS1 game on the Vita and it uses the DualShock 1, so a later PS1 game that maybe that doesn't use the ancient PS1 controller, but adds one with the L2, R2, and dual joysticks. Sometimes tapping the back of your Vita can make it press L2 or R2. So I would get really, really weird errors at times playing maybe more than one game, but I specifically remember it happening during Breath of Fire 4. I think it changed it to fast forward or paused the game or something, or changed the menu when you hit L2 or R2. So sometimes if I just was touching the back of the Vita with my hands in a resting position, the game thought I was holding down R2 and got real weird.
Yeah.
So I don't know what your experience is like that, but PS1 games in the Vita were great 90% of the time, but sometimes you got to be a little bit careful.
Yeah, like anytime I'm going into a port of a game on Vita, or in the PS1 Classics or something, first thing I do is check those controller settings. I'm like, okay, if I touch the back of this, is something going to happen? Because I'm going to brush against the back of it, and I do not want anything to just absolutely fall to heck. So
yeah, for maybe over an hour when I was trying to play Breath of Fire 4, and this would have been, I'd have to check the dates, but it was either January 2016 or January 2017. I was just so alarmed that my beloved Vita was broken, that that there was a real struggle. But then I figured out, it's when I'm resting my hands on the back. It thinks I'm pressing L2 or R2. Mm-hmm. Now I get it. It was I was concerned for a second, but then I eventually figured it out. But regardless, the Vita is a very nice machine to play games on. I think the controller and button placement feels good and makes sense, and games look great on it because of that nice screen. And but it did become a bit of an indie port machine, and like an upgraded port machine. And again, it's a little reductive to call it a port machine, but if there's ever a system that it was appropriate for, it's this one. So we're playing an upgraded port of a Wii game that had an extra few years of development on it, and the result is pretty gorgeous. This game looks beautiful and plays at least adequately, because I don't think it's a great action game moment to moment, but it's at least good enough.
Yeah, definitely. I heard, I was watching a video earlier today by YouTube username Neryl, who had basically compared it to a very, very relaxed Bayonetta in just the moment-to-moment gameplay, with it being just kind of simplified and such, but having a similar rhythm in some way. And I think that's decently accurate. Of course, it's not anywhere near the complexity or the combo machine that you can do with Bayonetta, but it's simple, and it can feel pretty good if you are getting your air dashes right and you're getting your down strikes and such. It works. It is competent enough for what's presented, because the presentation is really the key driver of the game.
I think that you can compare this to somewhat of a long tradition of ninja action games in Japan. Even going back into the 80s arcade days, games like Ninja Gaiden and the Goemon games made by Konami are sort of all share a bit of a lineage with this. And even in the Goemon games, at least I know there was a popular Super Nintendo one that had a translation project in the early 2000s. That one has a lot of RPG elements in it. And there's a N64 one. I think it's just called Mystical Ninja Goemon in North America. That was fairly popular. But games like that, and of course there's Ninja Gaiden, which was 2D for several years, and then had a bit of a 3D renaissance with the Tecmo ones on Xbox and 360.
Yep.
But the game that this reminds me of is an older one of those. And talking about strange development stories, Eva, stop me if I've told you this before. There is a 1984 or 85 arcade game called Legend of Kage.
No.
And
continue.
Okay. I don't think it's a great arcade game. It's semi-popular. It was made by Taito, which Square Enix bought several years ago. So I think Square Enix owns the license now. But it was a pretty good, or at least passable, ninja action arcade game from the 80s that had an NES port. But it reminds me of Muramasa because the stages are very vertical. The jumps are very floaty. There's a lot of jumping between branches in forest stages, and then along rooftops and ninja bases in that game. So this game almost feels like a much, much prettier version of Legend of Kage when you're playing it, when you're in most of the action sequences in the game. But Legend of Kage did have a sequel, Legend of Kage 2, which I have played. I've played it more than the original Legend of Kage even. But Eva, if you don't already know, can you guess what year and what system Legend of Kage 2 came on? Original was arcade and NES in 1984. I think 85. So hazard a guess for Legend of Kage 2.
1992 Sega Genesis.
Try 2008 Nintendo DS.
What?
It had a DS sequel 23 or 24 years later.
What? Oh
And
my God.
Legend of Kage is I think it was popular enough. Like it was a good at least an all right arcade game of that era. But who was demanding a Legend of Kage sequel 23 years later?
They clamored for it. The fans were just ravenous, and they knew what they had to do. They knew they needed Kage back.
I was when I was being a bad boy and pirating a bunch of DS games in the late 2000s, I stumbled across Legend of Kage 2. And so I downloaded it and got pretty far. The final boss, or maybe second to last boss, was really, really hard, and I did not beat him. But just like finding that game on a sketchy emulation website and then doing a little bit of research, like, I wonder where Legend of Kage 1 comes from, was a bit of a fun surprise. And again, this is over a decade ago for me. But playing this, I'm like, oh, the jump is kind of floaty. You're going from tree branch to tree branch, fighting a bunch of ninjas, and this stage is I'm running along the rooftops of some kind of castle town. This is totally Legend of Kage. So that's what this reminded me of. And Legend of Kage 2, I did end up buying a physical copy of it later, years and years later, because Square Enix was had a big sale on their store in something like 2019, and I'm like, what the hell? I can get this weird DS game that I tried 10 years ago for $10. All right, mail it to me, Square Enix. So I own a copy of Legend of Kage 2 for the DS, and that is what this game reminded me the most of.
I love that. Yeah, I had never even heard of Legend of Kage, but that is hilarious that that they would think, that warrants a sequel. But I mean, if you enjoyed it, I'm glad they did.
Yeah, no, it's Legend of Kage 2 is not brilliant, but it's pretty good. And Muramasa definitely reminds me of it. But Muramasa has way more RPG elements, way more consistent art style. But just like the way some stages are weirdly vertical and the way your jumps are floaty, and just sort of the nature of the setting with a Japanese folklore tinted version of post-classical Japan from hundreds of years ago. Like that all sort of aligns, and I think because Japan has probably dozens, maybe hundreds of ninja action games over the decades. like I mean, we mentioned a couple of them, but there's also Shinobi and probably dozens that just never left Japanese shores. Because again, like you and I are from North America, our exposure to Japanese games were mostly the ones that got localized. So. I am certain that there are 100 Japanese ninja action games that I have never played or heard of that perform this sort of larger lineage of games that Muramasa does. I am pretty sure that Kamitami and his Vanillaware buddies wanted to do a ninja action game with their art style and their sensibilities, and that's what we're playing.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a little bit surprising that this game was localized. I'm kind of surprised this game was localized at all, just because of how small Vanillaware was at the time. Like, I looked up that only 16 people worked on this game when it originally came out for Wii. And, this was kind of a time of a lull for a lot of Japanese game development on consoles. I mean, it wasn't HD, but it was a game that was really wrapped up in Japanese mythology and Japanese artistic sensibilities and Japanese music that was coming out on the Wii, which at that time had become a very global console and was selling extremely well in the United States, in Europe, and etc. So it's kind of strange to me that it was even localized at first, but I'm glad it was.
Yeah, that era of Nintendo was maybe their most successful ever, because I think the Wii and the DS are their two most successful consoles ever. I'd have to look at numbers to double check that, but I think that there was maybe a spike in Japanese games coming over on the Wii. Or a spike of more Japanese games getting localized because of the success of the global success of the Wii and DS. And it is a little bit surprising that this game would come out. I mean, Vanillaware was releasing games globally at the time, but I don't think all of their games have come out in all regions. So I'm sort of glad this one did. And what a coincidence that you were to pick up Okami and Muramasa at the same time, because those games do fit a sort of aesthetic and even an era and setting, because steeped in Japanese folklore, set in a samurai era or some kind of folkloric era of Japan. I think those two games fit reasonably next to each other, with one of them being a beautiful Zelda-like and the other being a beautiful Legend of Kage-like, that popular genre of Legend of Kage-like.
The best genre. Yeah, and funny enough, I actually just finished playing Okami HD a couple of days ago. So this is kind of like a decade on. I'm completing work that I did not do 10 years ago.
It took me a while to get to Okami as well. I bought that game on PS2, but then never got very far in it, which is story of my life. But it's totally because it came out while I was attending university, and that was where there's a lot of abandoned video game projects in the mid 2000s for me for that reason. I ended up playing Okami on the HD PS3 version in the early 2010s. I could find a list somewhere, but my guess would be around 2012, 2013 range. But that game is beautiful too. There is a Retro Encounter episode about Okami, but we are talking about Muramasa the Demon Blade. Oh, one weird, also unrelated video game development story. That is one of my all-time favorites. The famously bad game Daikatana, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, from around 99 or 2000, made by one of the creators of Doom. What's his name?
John Romero.
That's him. Yeah, John Romero, and he had a studio in Austin. Had the ridiculous tagline, "John Romero is going to kick your ass." Or John Romero is going to make you his bitch.
There
I think
you
might
go.
have been it. Yeah, and Daikatana had a really overblown bad development history. It ended up being a pretty unsuccessful game. It was advertised in my PC copy of Final Fantasy VII from around '99 to give you, and around when a lot of PC games came in those weird trapezoidal boxes. But my favorite ridiculous Daikatana story relates to the word kage, which is, the Japanese word for shadow. And they had sent over scripts for voiceover when they were making Daikatana, and the studio that was recording all the voiceover pronounced kage cage for every line of dialogue.
No.
And when John Romero heard it for the first time or saw it, it's oh no, how did this happen? And they had to re-record everything, which is just one bullet point on the silly, overblown development history of Daikatana.
What? Yeah, there's an entire treasure trove of blunders and everything to talk about with Ion Storm and Daikatana.
I think there is either a long-form piece or a short documentary or both about Daikatana, because it's exactly the kind of story that would merit that kind of project. And I think that's where I heard that that Kage cage story before. But yeah, Daikatana maybe also in the tradition of ninja action games, maybe not as good as Muramasa the Demon Blade.
It tried to be in the tradition, and the Game Boy Color version is the best one, and we'll say that.
Game Boy Color. Game Boy Color, some of the best Zelda games. Also my favorite Metal Gear Solid game.
This is so off topic, but really? The Metal Gear, what is that, Metal Gear Ghost Babel?
No. I think it's just called Metal Gear Solid, but it's it's for the Game Boy Color, and it's sort of a I think it's called Metal Gear Gaiden in Japan, maybe.
Oh, okay.
But it's a pretty competent Game Boy top-down action game in the Metal Gear Solid universe. I was kind of joking about that, but also not, because I'm not the biggest Metal Gear Solid guy in general. I've only finished one other game in the series, but Game Boy Color Metal Gear game, actually pretty good. Let me Google that to make sure I'm not making this up. It was a fever dream.
So it was just called Metal Gear Solid in the U.S., but it was Metal Gear Ghost Babel in Japan.
Okay. See, all right. So we were both right. I do not know enough about Metal Gear to know that it was called Ghost Babel in Japan.
I did not think that would come on this podcast and talk about Metal Gear, and I'm just not going to. Anyway, so
let's see. Metal Gear is pretty stealthy. So is Solid Snake a ninja? Is Metal Gear also in the grand tradition of Japanese ninja action games?
I mean, there can be a case made for Raiden. I will not be the one making that case today.
I can tell my Metal Gear ignorance is frustrating you a little bit, Eva. But okay, if we're talking about the development history of Daikatana and the Game Boy Color Metal Gear Solid game, we might be near the end of the episode. But before we go into it, before we get into housekeeping, I two questions for you. How excited are you to play more Muramasa? And also, do you think you're going to get into the DLC a little bit? Because we haven't mentioned this yet, but in the Vita version, there are 4 special DLC chapters.
Yeah, so I'm excited to play more. I'm kind of progressively warming up to it. And I'm going to see how it goes with my playthrough of Kisuke and Momohime's story. But I think I'm going to play the DLC because the DLC is called Genroku Legends, and it's exclusive to the Vita version. And there are 4 little short stories that are 1 to 2 hours long. They all have a different playable character, and it's one of the strangest DLC releases that I've ever seen, because it's okay, we're doing a remaster of this game, and instead of the DLC being some sort of costumes or like, combat missions or something. This
or even more Kisuke or more Momohime.
Right. These are entirely different characters put into these environments 4 years later on a different console. So I think just on that basis, I'm interested in it. So I'm probably going to give them a shot. And if it's something that I can stick more in this world's gorgeous art, which, as opposed to Okami, which has a very, a singular kind of artistic period of Japanese culture, this is kind of drawing from a lot of things, but specifically centered around kabuki theater. It's something that I just want to see more and more of, because every succeeding hour just brings new kind of aesthetic flourishes and things I'm hugely impressed by.
Yes, I am entirely in agreement with you. I think that Muramasa is so successful aesthetically and at least adequate in gameplay, and so my motivation to play more is to see more beautiful settings and elaborate boss designs. More so than seeing how the story is. The story is fine. The gameplay is fine. The art is amazing. And me wanting to play more Muramasa is very visually motivated. And those 4 small DLC chapters, the price isn't bad. They're $5 each or $15 for the 4-pack. Which I think is reasonable enough for what it is, and like one of them is a cat trying to avenge the murder of its owner,
yes.
which sounds great. Another one is a demon princess trying to do some kind of hell business. That sounds great. I'm at least intrigued by it. I'm not sure if I'm gonna pull the trigger on them yet, but I am interested in playing more Muramasa and might be interested in playing some Muramasa. You said Ganroku chapters?
Genroku Legends. Yeah.
Genroku Legends. That's what it was. I did not do enough research to remember either of those words, I'm afraid. But I am interested enough to remember what we're doing next on Retro Encounter. Next week, we're going to have our second episode on Muramasa, the Demon Blade. By then, Eva and I will hopefully have finished both Kisuke and Momohime's stories, and we'll be able to talk about the story in a more complete manner. Because, again, I think we're maybe halfway or just short of halfway on these 2 stories. I think there's 7 or 8 chapters for each, and I'm midway through Chapter 3 for both players, or both protagonists. So that's what's coming next week. And following that, we're finally going to do that episode on Crimson Shroud that I've been telling people we were going to do in March. Whoops. That is another weird, cool game that is definitely worth discussing. And also another Final Fantasy XIV episode. I know, listeners, you're tired of RPG fans' FF14 content, but we're not slowing down yet. We're doing part 3 of our 4-part FF14 miniseries in April. As well as a game, I think, we've mentioned this in previous episodes. We're doing 2 episodes on Suikoden 3 in April, a game I have not started yet because I've been too busy with Bravely Default 2 and Muramasa the Demon Blade. So, hopefully I can finish that game about 108 different things that aren't swords, by the time we record those episodes in April. And let's see, May, I won't say what game we're playing yet. We have figured out what we're doing in May, but it is to celebrate a very special video game anniversary. Please look forward to it. And in addition to Retro Encounter, RPG Fan has 3 other fine podcasts: Random Encounter about randomness, Rhythm Encounter about rhythmness, and Phoenix Edge about phoenixness. Please subscribe and try out or listen to all 3 of those, plus Retro Encounter, and review those on iTunes or Google Play or whatever podcast listening venue you are using. Give us all the feedback you can. And RPG Fan is not all about podcasts. You can also visit RPG Fan's main website with message boards, or our Facebook page, our Instagram page, our Twitter page, our Discord server, our YouTube channel, our Twitch channel, something streaming every day on Twitch. And if you want to reach out to us directly, the best way to do so is to email retro@rpgfan.com or on our individual social media pages. So, Eva, what's yours?
So you can find me on RPG Fan's general social media accounts, but you can also find me on my personals as @EvaLise on Twitter and Instagram.
And listeners, if you want to reach out to me directly, the best way to do so is usually Twitter. I am @TheRealMonsoon on Twitter most of the time, @Evoker for Dogs other times. If you want to hear my thoughts on the brand new Super Sentai series, Kikai Sentai Zenkaiger, which is super good 3 episodes in. But you also can find me on RPG Fans Discord as Monsoon Mike. So, Eva, I think both you and I have some more stylish ninja action to play, so let's hop off the podcast and get back to that.
Let's get some more swords.
Yeah, more swords. Oh man, like I think the real end game of this is collecting all those swords, because I'm definitely missing some. Listeners, thank you. Good night and good luck.